UN reports mass killings as Assad's deadly grip tightens on Aleppo. The rebels are cornered by Syrian troops. Men, women and children are left dead on the streets.
I hope you can do something for Aleppo people, for my daughter, for the other children.
As a ceasefire is agreed, the government says Britain must share the blame.
We as a House of Commons, we as a country, we vacated that space into which Russia stepped.
Also tonight, the Southern Rail strike leaves platforms empty as commuters take to the underground. There's talk of talks.
Just 16 months jail for the drunk tractor driver who killed this little boy on private property.
Wrapping with the president-elect, Kanye West drops by at Trump Tower.
This is the ITV Evening News with Alistair Stewart and Mary Nightingale.
Good evening. The UN has voiced its darkest forebodings for those living in the sliver of Aleppo still held by the rebels. More than 80 men, women and children have already been killed. More are cornered in homes without food, hospitals without medicines. For many, tonight's talk of a truce has already come too late.
Yeah, the Foreign Secretary said Britain must take its share of the blame. Parliament voted not to intervene. Russia filled the void, he said, on Assad's side. It has led, say the UN, to a complete meltdown of humanity. Dan Rivers reports from Aleppo on the siege's final hours.
On a day of horrendous bloodshed in Aleppo, President Assad's men are celebrating. As these fighters emerged from battle, across the city came reports of unimaginable horror.
The Assad militias are maybe 300 meters away. No place now to go. It's the last place. Really, I don't know what to say, but I hope. I hope you can do something for Aleppo people, for my daughter, for the other children.
These pictures give a sense of the violence but don't show alleged atrocities that the United Nations is convinced are being perpetrated as the battle rages. The UN claims women and children are being shot. It stops short of accusing Syria of war crimes, but if proven, that's exactly what such massacres would be.
This is as close as we're allowed to get today to the besieged rebel east. We can't see what's going on there with our own eyes, but we know through dozens of videos and testimonies from people still trapped inside. This is one of the darkest chapters in the history of the civil war in Syria, a day in which every shred of humanity seems to have deserted Aleppo.
I challenged one soldier about the claims of mass executions.
The United Nations claims civilians are being killed by the Syrian army. What do you say to that?
As you can see, if the civilians had been killed here, they wouldn't be coming back. On the contrary, as soon as they heard the Syrian army freed this area, they feel safe and are comfortable coming back.
This is Bustan al-Basha, a neighbourhood broken by this war, where children wander lost along streets on which they once played. Life is slowly returning here, 5 days after the battle to retake it. But no one here would dare criticise the army or speak of the violence it may have meted out.
The army helped us. They spread safety and stability in this neighborhood and in the country. So may God save our president, may God bless him and the army.
But this city has plunged into an abyss where even the most vulnerable children have not been able to escape. And now the biting cold of a Syrian winter is compounding the misery for those still alive. When the full facts are finally uncovered, the fall of Aleppo will rank as one of the most shameful episodes in the Middle East's tortured history. And what's worse is the world knew but failed to act. Dan Rivers, ITV News, Aleppo.
Boris Johnson was speaking during an emergency Commons debate about the unfolding human catastrophe in Aleppo. His visible anger at the brutality of the military campaign echoed condemnation around the world. Russia simply called that condemnation whining. Our security editor Rohit Katru now on the world's response to the fall of eastern Aleppo.
The war in Syria is approaching a defining moment. The suffering that is incomparable. After all the Russian bombs and Western words, the images have caused nations to pause and consider, but never to put an end to the crisis. Today, the Commons chamber felt like a room of bit-part players, an emergency debate and an explanation from the Foreign Secretary.
On August 29th, 2013, this House voted by 13 votes not to use force against Assad, even after he had poisoned hundreds of his people with sarin nerve gas. And we thereby, we as a House of Commons, we as a country, we vacated that space into which Russia stepped.
Then an admission from the former Chancellor.
The tragedy in Aleppo did not come out of a vacuum. It was created by a vacuum of Western leadership, of American leadership, British leadership. I take responsibility as someone who sat on the National Security Council.
The key players now are not in London or even Washington. Today, the Russian foreign minister said he was fed up with the US attempts to end the fighting. He said, with regard to Aleppo, you know, to be honest, we're tired of hearing complaints of our American colleagues from the current administration. Tonight, the UN Secretary General briefed the Security Council at the request of France and Britain. The chamber fell silent as he said blame for Aleppo should be shared.
Since September, the Security Council has failed to adopt 3 resolutions that could have enabled a humanitarian truce, evacuation of civilians, and the entry of life-saving aid. I have said before that we have collectively failed the people of Syria.
And the talking goes on a day of disclosure and debate about a city the world seems powerless to protect. Rohit Katru, ITV News.
Dan Rivers joins us live from Aleppo. Dan, lots of talk of ceasefire deals tonight. From where you are, does it seem like the Battle of Aleppo is over?
It does feel that way. There is the odd sporadic bit of gunfire, but that's probably in celebration. It's much more peaceful than it's ever been over the last few days, and certainly on the last trip that we were here. This evacuation process does seem to be gathering pace now, so we're getting conflicting reports exactly how it's going to happen. But the mechanics seem to be, there are some reports that even some civilians are coming out now, but most seem to be scheduled for dawn tomorrow, 5 a.m. local time, when we're told the first 5 buses will be set aside for civilians. They'll be taken to the western Aleppo countryside, from where they will be free to disperse. Idlib would be the nearest place. But look, the important thing about this is that Russia and Turkey are guaranteeing this process. 2 countries heavily invested on either side of this conflict. And you've got to wonder why only now they have managed to strike this deal. Is it because of that starkly worded UN press conference today talking about massacres of women and children? Did it take that level of bloodshed for those 2 sides to finally come together and say enough is enough, we need to do a deal and end this siege?
Dan Rivers live in Aleppo. Thank you.
Let's move on to other news now. And here, talks aimed at ending the strike on Southern Rail are to take place tomorrow. But for its hundreds of thousands of passengers, their journeys to and from work went beyond commuter torture today. A strike by drivers meant there were no journeys by Southern Rail at all. And if you wanted to get to work, you simply had to find another route. This is the scene at Red Hill Station in Surrey now, which would normally, of course, be crowded at this time of night. Paul Davis reports on a hellish day for rail passengers.
On a normal day, these are some of the busiest commuter lines in the country, but there are very few normal days on Southern Rail. Some passengers turned up to find closed stations this morning. The few trains that were running were packed. Getting to work at best an unpleasant experience, and for many, impossible. Today, tomorrow and Friday, all of Southern's 2,000 services have been cancelled by strike action. 300,000 passengers use these services on a weekday, so over the 3 days, 900,000 people will be affected. The dispute over the introduction of driver-only trains has been condemned as politically motivated, but the drivers' union insists safety is their motivation.
The increasing length of trains, the increasing amount of footfall in the 21st century, we don't believe that the technology or the make do amend on our Victorian infrastructure lends itself to one-man operation.
We're not trying to remove guards from other services, we're just changing the nature of their jobs. No pay cuts, no loss of job security. So of course this is politically motivated.
With ASLEF and the RMT planning more disruption into the new year, it's being called the worst rail dispute in a generation.
Every day of this strike is costing millions of pounds to the economy. But there's another price being paid, an emotional one. And it's led to long-suffering passengers taking to the internet today to voice their pain and frustration.
Because Jenny Lahan is taking 3 hours to get from South London to her job as a catering manager in Camden in the north of the capital, her son suffers. She posted this picture on the internet of 6-year-old Matthew in his pyjamas being taken to a friend's house at 5:30 a.m.
I was exhausted, had this awful journey yesterday as well. Saw my son walking down the street this morning in the rain. His blanket started to drag along the floor and I just started crying.
As those who made it to work today try to find a way home, Southern and ASLEF have at least agreed to meet tomorrow at the conciliation service ACAS. But the next 2 days of strikes are still going ahead. Paul Davis, ITV News.
A drunk tractor driver who ran over and killed an 11-year-old boy was sent to prison today. But Gary Green's sentence is just 16 months.
That's because the accident happened on private land, so Green could only be tried under health and safety laws. His victim's family is calling for a change in that law. From the court, Ben Chapman reports.
Harry Whitlam died under the wheels of a tractor, being driven by a man who was over twice the legal drink-drive limit. But today, despite 2 previous convictions for drink driving, Gary Green arrived at court knowing he'd face little more than a year behind bars. A legal loophole described afterwards as ridiculous by Harry's mother.
The sentencing today of Gary Green for 16 months and 2 weeks has highlighted the need for a review of the penalties that are available under health and safety legislation for offences of this type.
Harry enjoyed collecting eggs and feeding the animals at this farm near Leeds, where his mother worked as a cook. He was killed one morning, before it was even open to the public, when Green reversed his tractor into him, just a few hours after drinking the equivalent of 13 pints on a night out. But because it happened on private land, he could only be prosecuted under health and safety law, with a maximum sentence of 2 years. If it had happened on a public road, he could be facing up to 14 years in prison. It's a distinction his mother is now campaigning to scrap.
I think the law should be changed. It's about time, to be honest, it should be a zero policy on everything to do with drink driving. But, you know, it's time that these laws, they're so old, so many of the laws of this land are so old, they've never been reviewed, they've never been looked at, and so many people can hide behind them.
She wants that change to be known as Whitlam's Law, determined Harry's remembered for more than just the way he died. Ben Chapman, ITV News, Leeds.
Police say individuals at 4 Premier League football clubs are among those being investigated over allegations of historical sex abuse. Scotland Yard says it's looking at a total of 30 professional and non-professional clubs in the London area and more than 100 separate allegations of child abuse.
And a British man who tried to grab a policeman's gun in an alleged attempt to shoot Donald Trump has been jailed for 12 months in America. Michael Sanford tried to grab the weapon at a rally in the run-up to the US election. Now, there was a jump in inflation today, going up more than expected to its highest level for 2 years. More expensive clothing and petrol are being blamed for the rise to 1.2% last month, and that's up from 0.9%. Well, let's go to our business editor, Joel Hills now. You know what everyone's going to be asking, don't you? Is this the Brexit effect?
And the answer is yes, in as much as it triggered a sustained devaluation of sterling. Look, Mary, Britain imports far more than it exports, so it should come as no surprise that if the pound buys less, then we end up paying more. And inflation is inching up. In November, prices rose at a pace of 1.2% a year. At the moment, though, pay is rising twice as fast, 2.4%. So far, no problem. But most economists believe that will change in 2017. And here is why. Look at this. The price of materials and fuels bought by manufacturers has risen by 12.9%. That's inflation they're sitting on, and some of that will get passed on.
Enjoy Christmas while it lasts, because it's going to get more expensive. Inflation was never going to stay near zero forever. It was always going to pick up to about 2%. The problem is it's rising a little bit above that. It's not the highest we've ever seen. It would be a bear hug rather than a vice-like grip.
So, in summary, if you think back 12 months ago, Mary, we were talking about the possibility of petrol of £1 a litre at the pump. Today, it's £1.14 and rising. A supermarket price war that had raged for several years was actually leading to food price deflation. That is coming to an end. Supermarkets can't afford to sit on these pressures. 5 days ago, you may have seen, Poundland abandoned its commitment to everything for £1. These are pressures they can't deal with. A squeezing living standards is on the way. It is a result of Brexit. It may be short-lived, though, Mary, and some people will think it's a price worth paying.
OK, Joel Hills, thank you.
The Kremlin quickly gave its thumbs up today to Donald Trump's new Secretary of State. The oil boss Rex Tillerson is a known friend of Russia. But Mr. Trump himself was busy proving he can find plenty of other ways to raise eyebrows. This time by inventing the rapper and reality TV star Kanye West to Trump Tower. Our Washington correspondent Robert Moore reports.
Donald Trump was seen today not with his newly selected chief diplomat, but with Kanye West. Quite why the president-elect has been meeting with the rapper and entertainer is just another mystery. But in choosing this man, Rex Tillerson, a veteran oilman who's the head of ExxonMobil, to be the face of America to the world, Trump is defying Washington convention. For Tillerson has a close relationship with Vladimir Putin, even receiving a medal from the Russian president. And he has long argued against sanctions on Moscow. Trump allies say that for Tillerson, the Russian connection is no more than a key business relationship.
The good Lord didn't put oil in all freedom-loving democracies across the world, and yet Rex Tillerson was able to make this work. And Donald Trump and Rex Tillerson, they hit it off, and they have a similar vision of how to get things done.
Do not harm American competitiveness overseas, because
the question is whether Tillerson's appointment confirms what European governments fear, that Trump's foreign policy will be, in essence, pro-Russian. Many senior Democrats and Republicans, too, are more outraged than usual with the Kremlin, following that CIA conclusion that Moscow tried to manipulate the outcome of the US election.
The Russians disrupted our government, undermined the sanctity of our democracy, is totally unacceptable, and it must be investigated.
Before confirming Tillerson, many senators will want to quiz him on his links to Russia. Can the businessman stand up to a country that is challenging America on so many fronts and through aggressive cyber espionage may actually have influenced the election itself? Robert Moore, ITV News, Washington.
And finally, on a day like today, there's really not much, is there, to cheer us up, but we could not resist this. A tiny deer with a body no bigger than a Christmas tree bauble has been born at Chester Zoo.
The female mouse deer, an endangered species, originates from the Philippines. Weighing less than a pound, this cute Christmas baby is the first of her kind to be born in the UK.
There are something nice. That's all for now. Tom Bradby's here later with news at 10.
But from all of the team for now, a very good evening to you.
Bye-bye.